Inquisitors.
Northmen.
Shanka.
Lend us your steels.
There we go. So welcome everyone who's watching today. We are very excited to be talking about the First Lord trilogy, which I recently read for the first time, and Ed had a reread recently. And today we are joined by the awesome Friends Talking Fantasy podcast, who are avid First Lord fans.
Yes, they are. Thank you so much for joining us, Dylan and Charles. It's very exciting to be having you here on the channel talking all about the First Law. Now, we will do a spoiler-free discussion to start with, then we'll get on into the spoilers. But first of all, Charles and Dylan, would you be able to give a quick overview of what you cover on your podcast and why people should check you out?
Sure, I'll take this one, Dylan. This is Charles here, guys. And Dylan, maybe you just want to say a quick hello for everybody, so they know what you sound like.
Hi all, I'm Dylan.
And we're the friends over at Friends Talking Fantasy. Super excited to be collaborating with the Brothers Gwynne yet again. We are a podcast duo. We talk about fantasy, literature, and all kinds of other stuff. A lot of Abercrombie these days. We've been reading through the entire works of the First Law universe in preparation for the last book in the Age of Madness, which is dropping very soon. And so, we just are all on the same reading schedule now. So I'm just, super excited to be here and super excited to talk Joe Abercrombie.
And we love your podcast. So much fun to listen to. I recently listened to the Fellowship of the Ring episode you released, and it's inspired me to go and reread The Lord of the Rings. So that is not a bad thing whatsoever. And you, like you said, Charles, you cover all sorts of fantasy stuff from Red Country. That was a good discussion recently. So if you want to jump over there and check out some of their episodes, that would be really cool.
Yeah, we'll have a picture come up in editing and also put a link to their Twitter and the podcast in the description below. So definitely do check that out. We were on for an episode a month ago around that, and it was
too long ago
on there.
Too long.
Yeah, we gotta get you back.
We enjoyed it so much that we wanted to drag them over to show their faces on the channel. And so here we are, ready to talk some First Law.
Yeah, super excited to get into it, guys.
Right, I think I'm ready.
All right, shall we start with a spoiler-free pitch then of, shall we start with Dylan? Why do you think that everyone should read the First Law?
Yeah, well, I think that it's an interesting question because I definitely know people who end up not loving the First Law. It's not a great place to start. It's one of my favorite series, but I'll say that, I'll say that I do. I know I'm not good at the everyone should piece, but I'll say, if you want to give Grimdark a try, then this is the series, I think, to go for. And I think that everyone ought to give it at least a try if you're a big fan of fantasy, to see, is Grimdark for you? And I'll say that Joe Abercrombie is at Lord Grimdark on Twitter. He's going to give you a ride of a lot of really twisted stuff, but he's also got an incredibly great sense of humor. It's dry, witty. You folks across the pond, you have this kind of I don't know how to describe it. Yeah, it's like this witticisms that over here we're still waiting to figure out how to be that clever. But I'll say that if you like to see some subversion of tropes, you like some gritty, dark fantasy, and you have a sense of humor, then Joe Abercrombie's work is a fantastic choice for you.
Yeah, I completely agree. It is so fun, isn't it? As we'll talk about when we get into more of the detailed stuff, when we start talking spoilers as well. But Charles, why do you say everyone should read the First Law?
Wow. Well, first off, Dylan, excellent job. I agree completely. We've been talking about these books for, has it been almost like 10 years now that these books have been out in the world?
Yeah, well, longer, I think.
Oh, yeah. My goodness. And they're absolutely excellent. It's a great entry to Grimdark, as Dylan said. But I'd also say, if you're a fantasy reader that prioritizes character work above all else, then this is a fantastic, I would recommend this right away, because the character work in these books is incredible, and the creative directions that the author Joe Abercrombie chooses to take these characters in throughout not just this trilogy, but his entire universe of books, which is going to be 9 books soon. It's absolutely incredible. So I'd recommend it for character work, as well as an entry into grimdark, as well as just a great representation of modern fantasy. Highly recommend. Highly.
Excellent.
Awesome.
Thank you, guys. And I don't know how I can follow up there from Dylan and Charles. Some excellent selling pitches there. But I would jump in. I definitely agree with both of them. And I think that Joe Abercrombie is a master when it comes to his writing, that he immediately gets into the head of a character. And if you really want to experience another character's way of life, or the way they actually think, then look no further. The First Law is here for you, because there are some amazing action set pieces, which is different for every character, and Joe Abercrombie has a different voice for everyone he writes, and that's something I love to read in fantasy. Also, if you're a fantasy lover but you're not too keen on the high-end magic, this is a bit more low fantasy. Usually there are those moments of epicness, but usually this feels a bit more grounded, a bit more reality driven, and a bit more grim. So if that's your thing, go for it.
Yeah, definitely. I think a mixture of what everyone's been saying. I think that Joe Abercrombie, he really just does have it all in the First Law trilogy, doesn't he? He has those characters at the heart, but then he has that epic factor as well as you get further into the series, and the plot is awesome, so twisty-turny at times. And I think it's just the combination of those factors. You're just so engaged the whole time. And I was like a bit nervous about going into this because everyone has hyped it up so much. And I read it for the first time last month and blown away. It did not disappoint at all. It was so awesome.
Yeah, it was one of those things where I wanted to ask you how far in you were, but I knew whenever you got to a certain point I really loved, that you were going to come and tell me. It's one of those books that
no matter
you have
what
to
time,
go and talk to someone about.
Yeah, 2 in the morning, smash your door open. Ed, the only time Ed will let me do that.
Yeah. The only time I don't mind you waking me up, that's fine.
Yeah, I mean, we were hyping it up back when we were talking Shadow of the Gods, like we said, a month ago. And since then, Nick, you've like read through all of the books so far, or at least 6 of them. It's like absolutely incredible. So yeah, we may be in part responsible for the hype, but I'm glad that it delivered for you, and that we're here today so soon after you had just cracked open the blade itself. So I mean, do you need more of a recommendation?
Yeah, Will, are you on Red Country? Did I see that recently on Twitter? Dude, you're cruising.
50 pages left. And yeah, it might be fair to say I've got a bit obsessed. Maybe. Maybe. Just a bit.
That's how we like it.
It's my life. Just no one touch me. I'm reading.
Well done.
He was so obsessed, he dyed his hair blonde to be like Jezel. And then I had to copy, obviously.
I know, I didn't get the memo.
Yeah, we were talking about this off air, and I feel like we're trying to figure out, Giselle, is he the character that you really want to be like in First Law?
He just resonated with me.
That's a little scary. There are some narcissistic tendencies. We know that, not for you, Will, but for Giselle. I'm sure it's all the other parts that resonate for you.
Well, this morning he put his turtleneck on, and then he was looking in the mirror just going, what a jaw.
Admiring that chin, huh?
What a jaw.
If only the heroes of the past had a jaw like this.
Well, watching your videos, I saw Will go blonde first, then Ed, and it's like, I wonder who's next. You know, I think we got to get everybody on board.
Absolutely. We're trying to get Dad to dye his beard blonde, but he's
there you go.
not having it. He will stick with the grey. Yeah.
I don't know if Dylan can be convinced to change his precious hair to blonde.
Well, okay. This is the thing. Back in college, I didn't go permanently blonde, but I did dress up as Joffrey Baratheon, and I did go blonde temporarily. Maybe I'll be able to scrounge up that picture. And I had a person dressed as the Hound, my college roommate Matt, and he had a great costume. Mine was just like a typical royal person costume with my hair going blonde, but he went all out like with the scars and stuff like that. So maybe I'll scrounge that up and post on Twitter. So I have gone blonde before in a fantasy themed way. Yeah.
We now need to see that. We have to.
Those blonde Baratheons.
I'll look for it.
What are they like?
So many blonde Baratheons out there. Yeah.
That's crazy. I know. Too many, if anything. Too many. I think that's probably a good point to start talking spoilers then about the Blade itself. We now know that one of the characters has blonde hair. So I'm sorry to those of you that haven't read it yet, but there is a character with blonde hair. But let's talk then the Blade itself. Now, when did you guys first read this book?
Oh, geez. I mean, that probably was about a decade ago. We didn't read it upon release, I would say, but it was one of the earlier books when I started really getting into fantasy, which the Game of Thrones show, not surprising with me talking about Joffrey over there, was a big inspiration for me getting into fantasy. So probably not long after like season 3 of Game of Thrones, whenever that was. Yeah. So I would guess about a decade ago, we read these books. And I think I read it immediately. I was like, Charles, you got to check these books out. They are right up our alley, character focused, witty, dark, all this stuff. And Charles grabbed it and he got addicted pretty quick after.
Yeah, I was going to say, I remember you recommending it to me quite adamantly. And, Dylan's never steered me wrong with the recommendation. And my gosh, it's funny how like you can bring yourself to where you were when you were reading them. I was on a road trip to Montana. I lived in New York at the time. And that's when I got the omnibus of all 3. So I guess all 3 were out at the time. So, it wasn't at the time of release, and just read right through them while I was on vacation. So yeah, it was great. It's been a long time now.
Well, a book's great when it sticks you when you read it and you remember that exact time, don't you? Absolutely. And there are perks to having read them all, like me having them all available, but it must have been also awesome to slowly see this world and the characters built over time as well, reading each book as it's come out.
Yeah, I mean, I read the trilogy pretty much straight through, and then I only started getting into the standalones and now the Age of Madness as part of the show. So I'm reading some of these stories for the first time, which is a lot of fun. And Dylan's read them all kind of as they've come out
multiple times. Yes,
and now he's going through them again. So
yeah, and once I started reading, I could not stop reading Abercrombie. And I caught up to wherever, I think maybe right about when Red Country came out was when I was picking them up. So I read all the way through those. And then I remember when Sharp Ends came out, that's what we just did an episode on that one recently. I got that one over here. And then I've been following the Age of Madness through as they come out. And we're lucky enough. I guess
you're showing it off.
Did I do it?
Do it.
We're lucky enough where we have an arc of the wisdom of crowds, and so this one not out yet, and this is the first time that I'll be able to read it before even it comes out. So
that is amazing. That must be such an amazing feeling for an author that you've loved. Wow.
I know. It's like, dude,
I can't even explain it because I mean, this is the cool thing about being in this space and these books. When I was reading through the earlier ones, I never imagined that. I was like, okay, well, now I wait till September. I never imagined I'd be sitting here in August holding this. So it's so cool.
I'm pretty jealous. I mean, people have challenged people to the circle for less. So keep holding that.
Dylan, hold your shield.
Ed, you actually have practice at this stuff. I don't think I'd have any chance whatsoever. I've seen you in that armor. There is no way that I could take you in the circle. Maybe if we hit the tennis courts, I'll have a shot.
You do one match of each.
Yeah, you'll volley me out of there. No problem.
So wait, what's the timestamp for Dylan bringing up tennis now?
Cast your bet. Who had 27 minutes?
Okay.
That's better than usual.
Soon. That's pretty good.
You held off a long time there, Dylan. So the Blade itself, for those of you that, well, obviously this is the spoiler section, so we've all read this now. But we're introduced to Logan, Nine Fingers, the notorious barbarian that he is, and then we meet Glocta and Jezzel. They are the main kind of 3 staples of the trilogy. Who was your favorite from the very first chapter? Was there someone that you immediately connected with?
Yeah, for me, it's Logan. I mean, I would say right from the beginning, but the first chapter is called The End in classic Abercrombie style. So right from the end, I was knowing that Logan was the character that I was most intrigued by. I just absolutely love his axioms and his wisdoms. We get in right away with the action as well. And Logan, I don't know how to explain. I've said before that he's basically changed my life. Once you've got tasks to do, it's better to do it than live with the fear of it. That runs through my head just in my day-to-day life when I'm trying to not procrastinate at things. And his journey, I guess we're in spoilers for the original trilogy right now. Yeah, his journey of really sincerely trying to be a good man with you could go to say that with all the effort, he's still unable to truly reach that place. He has his moments, right? Like when he takes Kwai and he leaves the cooking pot and all that kind of stuff. But just this kind of like trying to be a good man is a journey, not a destination. And you can give all your best effort and not necessarily be accomplishing it. I just love that journey from someone who enjoys morally gray, complex characters. So love Logan.
Yeah, Abercrombie tormented me with what he does to Logan. I mean, I think everyone has their low moments, don't they? But Logan, I think, more than any of the others, just tore my heart out. And I was like, this is too much. I love this man. And what is he doing to him? Oh.
You love him, and then you see the other side to him, the Bloody Nine, and it's like, okay, I understand why he's the most feared man in the North, why he has so many enemies, but you can't help but get behind him, which is another staple of Abercrombie's work. What about you, Charles? Who's your favorite?
Oh man, Logan's way up there, but since Dylan did such a great job with him, I'm gonna say Glokta, right? Everyone's other favorite, because right away in his first chapter, he's lamenting about having to take the stairs and he's cursing the inventor of stairs, and then he goes in and is going through an interrogation, which is very violent and brutal, and it's like, oh, we used to be friends, and then like as he's torturing him, so it's like, whoa, this character is out of control. But there's something also so clever about him and so like, you know, pragmatic about him too, that you win anyway. No, he's like torturing someone he once considered like a comrade, and it's like how Abercrombie was able to pull that off right in chapter 1. Like, you know, you have a good character to work with when you can do that. And then I think he just continues to be a fan favorite throughout the series, and it's so fascinating to watch him through the Blade itself, and him just being kind of had this more cynical approach to everyone in this world and what's going on in it. It seems the most like Abercrombie's voice to me than all the other characters in the Blade itself, and that's just why it's so much fun to appreciate the story through his chapters.
Yeah, I completely agree, Charles. I mean, it is so much fun going through Glokta's his chapters. Every single chapter with him is just so engaging, isn't it? And I think that whilst he's renowned for his wit, I think that also that Abercrombie, he struck a very fine line where, obviously, as you said, in that opening chapter, he's torturing a comrade and he does some terrible things, but he doesn't take pleasure from it. And I think that makes him, in a sense, sympathetic.
Why do I do
this? He's like,
this
is the only thing I can do, and I'm just going to do it, basically. And I think that even though he does those terrible things, because he doesn't enjoy it, it makes you want him to get somewhere good. You feel like he deserves another chance at life, don't you?
Absolutely.
Well said, Will. And I'll say too that it's part of Abercrombie's genius of character writing that he's able to, he grounds you in Glokta's pain more so than anything else, which helps build that empathy for him as a character, where he is someone who, I mean, struggles with just day-to-day living. And that's something that even if you don't, it's good if you don't like the actions that Glokta is behaving in, you can understand why he's been put in a position where that feels like his only option. And it's what he understands as pain and how to administer it. And then that's what he does, even though he knows it's a terrible thing to do. So yeah, incredible character.
Yeah, it's just a really great balance there. And also some of my favorite moments of the Blade itself are Jezal and Glokta interacting and how they both take the other one. It's just genius when they bump into each other and you see Glokta's reaction, and then it goes to Jezal, who's terrified in the moment, and then he acts all cocky afterwards. It's so funny.
My favorite thing has to be the internal dialogue as characters are conversing with each other or looking at each other. I think there's that famous chapter when Logan Ninefingers and Baez they're at the dinner scene, aren't they? And Glockter is there trying to uncover if this person is really Baez, and the way they talk, or the way they think about each other, is just so funny. And it's hilarious. And I think Joe Abercrombie, this is why I recommend Larry McMurtry, because he doesn't, when he writes a chapter, he doesn't stick with just one character in that chapter. He likes to flip between them. And that's the best part, I think, for me, Abercrombie's writing, when he flips between those 2 or 3 characters all in the same scene, you see what they think about each other. That's very similar to Larry McMurtry, and that's what I love.
Yeah, those character interactions, definitely. I think we haven't mentioned Colin West yet, and he was one of my favorites. I mean, furious. Every single character, they have their major flaws, but again, they're sympathetic at the same time. And talking about those interactions, a scene that stuck with me is when Glockter and Colin West have that chat near the end of The Blade itself, where West is going to go away and he asks Glockter to look after Ardy. And the whole journey of that conversation, Glockter realizing West did try and see him and realizing that maybe I do have a friend. And there's a moment where you see how out of touch Glockter is, because he goes to pat West on the shoulder as he's crying, and then he ends up just going, "You okay?" And it's just so much character there that he's trying to actually help, but he just doesn't know how.
Yeah, it's such a great moment. I'm a big Colin West fan. I some of the scenes, like, he punches way above his weight class in terms of like the percent of the book he's in and how meaningful his scenes are from my point of view. I just like some of his moments are just so memorable and impactful for me. And again, it's this idea of like balancing people's like trying to be good people versus like sometimes the actions that they are, and do they necessarily achieve that, which Dylan explained really well. And that scene in particular, again, it's like Dylan and I talk all the time about how Abercrombie loves this idea of these are the stories that the characters tell themselves in their head. And Abercrombie uses point of view so masterfully to get us outside of the character's head to get that like unbiased perspective of like the person might look a little ridiculous. It's like Glockter's describing Logan as like looking off into the distance, like oafishly, like when he's like pondering some philosophical thing in his head. And it's the same thing now of like, oh, no one came to see me, I'm this tortured guy that nobody likes, that everyone's against me, this whole thing. And was just like, I tried to see you twice, man, and your mom turned me away both times because I'm not a noble born or whatever. And then it like kind of clicks for Glockter in that way of like, yeah, this was like the story I had in my head this whole time, and I was wrong. And I think that was kind of eye opening for him. It's a great scene.
Yeah, I love it. It shows Glockter, he's very self aware, isn't he? And he knows his faults.
Sorry, Will. Yeah, I mean to interrupt. I get all excited, but it's like it's interesting because he's incredibly self-aware in some ways and unbelievably aware of the world he's in and the people around him. He's got this great read on people, Glockter does, and he's so inquisitive. I mean, he starts as Inquisitor Glockter, and it's always asking questions about everything. And then you see how deeply self-loathing he is, that he never stopped to question the story he was telling himself about why everyone hates him and why even his friend Colin West didn't come to visit him. There's a guy who questions every single thing, but why does he not question the one thing that is someone actually cares about me? You get an idea. That's how deep he is in self-hatred.
Yeah, I think that's one example of just how Abercrombie's thought about these characters, isn't it? They're so fully fleshed out that I imagine if I read these all again, I'll get a completely different reading of them right from the beginning, knowing the context of their character. And as we'll talk about as we get further into talking about Before They're Hanged and Last Argument with Kings, you can see he's planned all 3 books so well from the beginning. He knows where he's going. He's got the end in sight, and he knows how to drip feed that information. So when the big penny drops, it's just like, oh my word, it all clicks into place and there's no missing parts. It's just
I would
I
say
love that.
I mentioned earlier I read like the omnibus. It was like all 3 in one ebook collection, and it's interesting going back and reading them as books. I'm like, oh, the Blade itself ended like that quickly. And I feel like I've had to talk some people in the community off the ledge a little bit after reading first of the Blade itself, and they're like, I mean, it was fine, I guess, but I was like, no, you gotta like keep going. There's so much more here. It's like you said, he had the whole thing planned and everything's not as it seems and all that other stuff. And there's, again, the stories we tell ourselves and the story that's actually happening. And it's also brilliant that it's like, I don't know if you can form a full judgment after the blade itself. You can get a sense of if it's the style's right, but it's like the story has so much more to offer.
Yeah, definitely. I think the plot takes a backbencher in the blade itself, but it's all being set up cleverly in the background. And so before they're hanged, it just kicks off from the beginning and it does not stop, does it? The plot takes more of a center focus. And I think that it might have been hard if people had read the blade itself at the time and then had a year to read before they could read before they're hanged. But I think now we've got them all out, just plough straight onto before they're hanged. And you'll see how it is all on purpose. It's not that Joe Abercrombie's forgotten, oh, I have to have plot as well. He's not forgotten that. It's there. And you'll see how much when you get into Before They're Hanged and Last Argument of Kings.
Yeah, I think binging them is the best thing to do because you can see all of the symmetry that Joe Abercrombie has throughout everything from when he's just, writing a simple paragraph and he has a motif all the way to his characters and how the plot really moves through the characters. I love how, like we were saying, that, Glockter's really self-aware of himself. And then Jezal isn't really. He thinks he's kind of, the top of the food chain until he starts to meet these characters who really do bring him down a peg or two. And it's so funny to see how he's so low down really in the food chain and where he ends up in The Last Argument of Kings. And there is that symmetry there, which is just hilarious. It's brilliant. So I think that's probably a good opportunity to talk about Before They're Hanged then.
Yeah, so if we move on, so let's take the blade itself away. And so the next in the trilogy, of course, is Before They're Hanged, the second middle installment. You've got another cover there. This is the 10th anniversary edition.
I was going to say, you got some nice covers. I've never seen that one.
Yeah, so the 10th anniversary editions there. I love them. We got them from
fancy seeing that.
Ed, are ours matching?
They're very nice.
So many editions.
Yeah.
And Before They're Hanged, I think personally is my favorite of the trilogy, mostly because of the dynamic of the group of
we affectionately call them the Fellowship of the Seed.
It's so just brilliant.
I think this is where Joe Abercrombie starts to really subvert those tropes, doesn't he?
Yeah.
Even like you said, Charles, the Fellowship of the Seed. Look how different they are to the Fellowship of the Ring.
Yeah,
and it's just brilliant.
Yeah, and I think also we didn't really talk about Pharaoh or the Dogman in the debate itself because I think they did. You only have a few chapters of them, but they're just warming up, and they both really come into their own and Before They're
They're also iconic, aren't they? And that's what I'm finding as we talk about these books. There are iconic moments, iconic characters. Just the way Pharaoh swears at Brother Longfoot it will go down in history as my favorite moments in the First Law.
He also gets points for punching Baez in the face. That was
yes, that is tail end of Blade itself. But yes, that is an incredible moment, and you don't realize. I mean, I know we're Before They're Hanged, but you don't realize until way later in Last Argument of Kings how important a moment that is of someone punching Baez in the face,
and how much he deserves it.
Yeah. Oh, it's just okay. Whoa, what's going to happen here? And then he's like, okay, I need her. Yeah, I need her. And
angry Gandalf is a scary thing.
Angry.
It's so beautiful.
Yes, and Machiavellian Gandalf even. It just
Yeah, I got way more to say about that when we get into Last Argument of Kings. But for now, it's just, again, Dylan and I also say all the time about how, like, Abercrombie's not afraid to be scathing of characters in the narration, like one in their POV. The narration describing the character will make Jezal seem like extra selfish and clueless, and it'll make Logan seem extra like pondering. And it's just so funny now when you have them all together and you're like lightning fast changing the POVs around the whole camp, so you can see like, oh, this is actually quite humorous now because we're getting the other side, and like Jezal is falling on deaf ears with Jezal. He's not learning any lessons, and then Jezal thinks of Logan as this big oaf, and like the way they go around each other in this group is just so entertaining, and it's certainly one of the highlights of this book.
Oh yeah, I love with Logan. I think this is where he became my favorite character because of he sets this mission to himself. He's like, okay, look, I've got a fresh start, and let's get these people, let's become an actual group, let's be friends. And he starts working them down, and it's when
chipping away.
It's when Pharaoh doesn't swear at him that he's like grinning from like ear to ear, and he's like, I've made progress. And I love
and there's like a moment where he's like, he gives Jezal something, and like he's like, oh, I'll do these small kindnesses and I'll win them over, and then it snaps to Jezal's POV. He's like, that was weird, like what is wrong with that guy? So it's like those things are all very funny to see them working in this group.
And how Jezal first he's so like averse to Logan, and then slowly he's like, maybe he's not so bad, and then he's like
the one he clings onto,
and then he's like, no, actually he is bad, and then he's by the end. I love how they all gravitate towards Logan, and when Baez is incapacitated for a little while, Logan kind of takes that role without even meaning to, and it just works so amazingly, and that dynamic, I just loved it so much.
Yeah, and that moment with Pharaoh sticks out, where Pharaoh's thinking about running away, and Logan does that I stick, you stick, we'll watch each other's backs talk with her. And it's again the amazing character writing that Abercrombie consistently displays in relationship writing, where you feel like you really understand Pharaoh, you really understand Logan, you see what they've been through, even with, I believe Pharaoh saves Logan's life in The Blade Self, and you see how she, as someone who doesn't trust anyone, could start to trust Logan. And we can talk if we want to about the extent to which trusting Logan's a good idea. But that being said, we see how he earns her trust in Before They're Hanged, and it's some incredible leadership that he shows when Baez is out.
Yeah, and although I think Logan might be my favorite and most loved character, I enjoyed Jezal's chapters the most, because you were seeing all of those characters from perspective, and I just found them so funny, and how he starts to gravitate towards Logan, doesn't he? How he sees him kind of as a father figure, with that, like you said, Dylan, the philosophical advice that Logan gives. It's not just us that take it on board, it's Jezal as well, it's the characters, and the characters affect each other. And then when Pharaoh sees the bloody nine is just a fantastic moment.
Oh yeah, and those scenes where Logan, he goes from that father figure to stay behind me, and it's like, oh, it's happening again. It's just I love it so much. And with Jezal, him changing so much, I loved him in The Blade itself, but he didn't really have many redeemable qualities, did he? But
poor Jezal. I think Abercrombie loves kicking him around, poking fun at him, and just loves how clueless he is, and takes every opportunity to just eviscerate him, and Jezal doesn't even know he's being eviscerated. It's like a beautiful thing to watch happen on the page.
There's a moment, speaking of that, Charles and I talk about how the prose will, even in people's own perspectives, just be scathing toward them. And there's a moment before they're hanged where Jezal's reflecting on the fact that he's lived a privileged life, but he's still so stuck in his way of viewing it that the phrasing is essentially, Jezal became, this is paraphrasing, Jezal began to become dimly aware, and that word dimly, I'm very confident, is used, like dimly aware that he might have had a more privileged life than most. And it's like Jezal just getting absolutely roasted by Abercrombie's prose by that single word, dimly.
And he travels through the group, doesn't he? And he goes to see each character. And he's like, I'm going to talk to them, try and create a bond. And he goes to Pharaoh. She's just like, shut your hole.
Right.
I think so. I'm great with women. Okay, I'll pick Pharaoh then.
Yeah. Yeah. And then he pulls his horse back. And when she's out of earshot, he just goes, crazy bitch.
It's so awesome.
I love that when he does go through those changes and a bit more redeemable, that he's still got his old traits, that he loves saying thank you to Pharaoh more than anyone else, because he loves annoying her still, because she gets so angry. And it shows that whilst he is changing and essentially he's living Logan's advice and becoming a better man, he's still got that in him to annoy other people and just trigger them. And I love
the fact that he would even approach Pharaoh and try and, like, whether it's flirting with her or like poking at her, it's like just shows how clueless he is. And I think it's those like character work moments that like really shine in this book. It's like we know, because we know Pharaoh, like how crazy the situation is. And I think that speaks to an author's ability to write great characters when you don't have to explain that dynamic. We just feel it and love it so naturally. And it's things like that of like, wow, Jazal's so off base by thinking he can just like ride up next to Pharaoh and strike a conversation. The fact that he even thinks that that's an idea he should do is hilarious.
Oh, it's so good, and we've talked a lot about that dynamic, and I love it so much. And so we've talked a lot about the fellowship.
Yeah, let's ride on over to old Styx himself, and let's see. So what do you think of Glocta's thread in Dagoska?
I really liked it. It reminds me of, for all you Game of Thrones fans out there, there's scenes with Tyrion and King's Landing that it's very reminiscent. And I'll just say, for anyone that's gotten this far, I don't know how you would do this, but if you're a fan of Tyrion, read these books because, Glocta is such a great parallel, distinctly different, but also a lot of similarities that I love. And it's particularly these moments we get Abercrombie really flexing his political intrigue muscles. We said so much about character work, but he can create these intrigue political dynamics as well. And this is a good example of that.
Yeah, I think that we see with the different perspectives in different places. We'll talk a bit more about Glocta, but then also you've got obviously two perspectives up north, and he really widens the scope to the Weldon plot, doesn't he? And with that political intrigue. And so Dylan, what do you think about good old Glocta down in Dagoska?
Yeah, I think that this is Glocta's shining book of the three. He really gets his own chance to have the spotlight in his storyline. And I think you get to see Glocta in his element of being involved in this political intrigue. You also get to see him trying really, really hard to do the right thing in an extremely helpless situation. And it is... it's hard to say you admire a person who tortures people for a living, so I won't go that far, but I'll say that he displayed a lot more admirable qualities in Before They Were Hanged, and this is the book where I started to really get more attached to Glocta as a person that I would root for, rather than just, wow, this is a really interesting character that I want to understand better.
Yeah, I think it's a common theme, isn't it? With Joe Abercrombie, he loves having characters who are trying to be better people, but the world brings them down. But he does it all in such different ways. Obviously, Logan, he has another side to him, and then Glocta's own battles as well, trying to be a better man. They're so different. So even though it's kind of the same theme, they're both so engaging in just different ways.
And I love that there's no happy ending for the siege in Dagoska. Yep. No one comes out of it happy, apart from the fan favorite, Koska. Nikimo Koska.
Aim soldier of fortune.
A drink.
Yeah.
And this is the first time we've seen Koska's genius, which is I think Abercrombie, I could just tell straight away he loves writing Koska. I think he must really enjoy it. Yeah. And the lines they fall off the page, don't they?
Absolutely.
Yes. I mean, yeah, he brings you, he is unique, but brings you into that headspace of a Captain Jack Sparrow type character with all these roguish elements. Yeah. And he just delivers these lines that are so witty, but like weirdly wise, coming from someone who does not seem to have their life together at all. And when you meet him, right, he's in this just... in this bar that has completely seen better days. And then he reflects that too. There's this amazing description when you get introduced to Koska of just like his boots have seen better days, his clothes have seen better days. And you can tell that this is a man who's seen better days. He's just down on his luck, but it's all on him. And we also get to see him shine then when the siege is on, which is so cool because someone who during peacetime struggles to get his act together then is absolutely fearless when the fight is on. And somehow this is something Abercrombie does so well is he's able to find these contradictions in characters that make so much sense in the way that he conveys it, and Koska is certainly no exception.
Yeah, he's surprisingly honest for someone who's so in love with himself.
Yes.
Yeah, he's very self-aware, isn't he? And I think that you see that he will try and get out of a situation whenever he can, but if he can't, he will just meet it on. He's quite practical in that way, isn't he? Yeah. And you see that in the Siege of Dagoska. He can't get out of the initial fight, so he's like, I'm just going to throw myself in there and do the best I can just to survive then. And then as soon as he has a chance to get out of danger whilst earning some money and some benefits from it, he will. And I love how he's further explored in the standalones, which hopefully we'll do another chat on the channel or on the podcast soon about the standalones. But get away with myself.
We need to move to Furious.
That's a great tease.
We need to move to Furious, don't we? Because Colin West is this poor man in this book. He really tries his hardest and he really does some bad things, but you still root for him. If anything, I think in the Blade itself, I mean, when he hits his sister, doesn't he? And that's kind of the most, it's very real in the fact that, how he hates himself afterwards. And, he feels like he doesn't deserve those heights that we think he actually should, because we're still behind him. And then to go and kill your prince when really, if we're honest, he's the nicest man in the trilogy, isn't he? Yeah. To kill Prince Ladislas, him and the Dogman, yeah.
He spared the world from a Ladislas-led country, yeah.
That scene, I love it. Being named Furious, I think his whole journey through there when he's the initial battle, and he just knows he's like I'm probably going to die because of this prince. And then there's that battle, the way that there's something, that ominous tone, isn't there? That just descends just before the battle, and this is going to go wrong.
And these armchair generals are just not doing it for the youth.
One of them, Capital. Let's charge straight into them.
Yeah,
it's like,
Capital.
No. And when
they think Locke is dead,
cavalry start returning, and Ladislas like, "Oh, my men are back," and Wes is like, "No,
dead.
There's something wrong." And then he sees these beards, and he's like, "It's the Northmen." And then that whole getaway, and it really shows that he is really scared, but also he's quite practical again, isn't he? As a soldier, that he's got a mission in mind. Okay, I have to do this. And even when all the other senses are just flying about and he doesn't really know what to do, he kind of clings on to that, doesn't he? And he's like, okay, well, I need to do this and just do everything I can. And then he snaps, doesn't he? It's all about looking after Ladislas. And he has this fight, and he's named Furious, and he's reached the end of his tether.
Yeah.
And then he kills Ladislas. And that's a real turning point for his character, isn't it?
Oh my gosh, yeah, so much to unpack with Wes. He is one of my favorite characters for sure. And in those moments, Dylan and I were talking, it's like, when you're getting the approval of Black Dow, that something is seriously wrong with you. Because like throughout these moments where they're like trudging through the frontier, Black Dow's like, hey, I kind of like this guy. And then like he finally, he finally earns the name Furious, and Black Dow's like, oh, finally. It's like, this guy's awesome. So when you get that kind of endorsement, something should be cluing you off that maybe you're not the noble guy you set out to be all the time. And again, there's this subplot that started with the Blade itself that continues through with like this bureaucratic, out of touch nobility within the Union. And here's Wes, who pulled himself up by his own bootstraps, first to the breach at the Orient. He's like a real stand-up guy, that Colin West. And to see him like have to deal with that every day, and then the fact that they layer on that he has this anger management problem. And my gosh, that scene with Artie's so well written. One of the best written scenes in the whole trilogy. Just really stands out. Like fantastic dialogue and character work there, where Artie even drops things like, oh yeah, he always apologized afterwards too, and things like that. It just hits you so hard. Yeah. So that all builds up to this moment where now he sees Ladislas and he's just like so over it. They almost died in a raid, and he just boom, full furious.
Yeah. And I think the last line of that chapter is Black Dow saying, I'm beginning to like you, or something like that. That is exactly as they're saying. Out of all of them, Black Dow is the one who you do not want to endorse your actions. Dogman 3.
Yeah.
I mean, we didn't really talk about the whole group up there in the Blade itself, but I love the group of Northmen, don't you? Of Tolduru, the Thunderhead.
Yeah. Who's your favorite, guys?
Yeah.
Oh my god!
I mean, it's hard to say favorite when it comes to Black Dow, but the one that has always stuck out to me among those crew is Black Dow, and he's a very interesting character as this supposed to be kind of the epitome of all that is bad and primal and evil, but he's also really funny and witty, and it's like that's the thing. It's another place where Abercrombie shine perceptive. Like that's the thing, right? He's poking at West because he sees right through West's exterior of like gritting his teeth and pretending he's really dutiful, because he's like, dude, underneath it, you're like me, and he can see that. And so yes, he's such an interesting character, because the character that's supposed to be the example of everything wrong and does the worst things in most books would be just that with no other elements. And then in Abercrombie's novel, it's this person with so much personality. So absolutely love Blacked Out.
Oh, he is amazing, and we'll talk again when we do the standalone talk about Blacked Out in Heroes. But Charles, who's your favorite of that group?
Oh man, Blacked Out is a great representative. I think he gets even better in the next book, which we'll table that conversation for now. And let's see. I mean, I love Dogman as well. There's so much going on with him. We've drawn some interesting parallels, Dylan and I, between Dogman and Wes. They're kinds of two sides of the same coin. Wes is like the guy who's at heart an angry, violent dude, but is trying to live in a society that's bureaucratic and not that way. And then Dogman's the exact opposite. He lives in the violent North, and he's a pretty, for all intents and purposes, a chill guy. And they're just also in very similar situations. So I love comparing the two, and just the way that Dogman sees himself versus how everyone else around him sees him, and how he kind of earns the respect of people, if you'd ask him, by accident, like not meaning to. So there's a lot I like about that. And then there's the mythos of Three Trees is always a fun. He's just like a superhero. Three Trees is awesome.
He's someone who everyone respects, no matter what side they're on, isn't he? And that the battle at the end of Before They're Hanged, and that whole scene with Fenris the Fifth, one of my favorite.
Oh yeah, that was this book. I was trying to remember, because that's like I love Three Trees for that moment.
It's that battle is just amazing. I think beforehand, if we talk about West had just seen the document. Is it Cat Hill or Cathill? Yeah, and
Cat Hill.
Why would you want to be with me? And she's like, "You're too angry."
That was so.
Yes,
this is brilliant.
It's so. I love that moment, because it's another sort of subversion where you're in West's point of view with that relationship that seems to be developing, and you think, okay, well, he saved her, and usually when a male character saves a woman, then they end up getting together in most books. But in this book, it's like, well, yeah, he might have done that. I'm sure she appreciates that, but it's like she's seen that primal. Yes, why would you want any part of being involved with someone like that in a relationship? And she might not have seen what he did to Artie, but she probably has a sense that that's what he's capable of. So it makes total sense in the story, but it feels like it comes as a subversion from a narrative perspective. And but it makes sense with character.
And I love how the Dogman's group, they're always kind of nipping at each other, aren't they? They're teasing each other. Blacked Out and Talduru Thunderhead winding each other up. But when it comes to fighting against Bethord, they carry on winding each other up. But there's this kind of this bromance between them all that is, they're really going to fight against Bethord. And then the Shankar come up, which is... they despise the Shankar, don't they? And it's just something unheard of to them to join forces, and it just kind of confirms their thoughts that fighting for the Union is the correct thing to do. And the battle there when Shivers, you meet Shivers, don't you? And he's again a character that Joe Abercrombie has just, you think he just pops up randomly and Before They're Hanged, but he uses him so effectively throughout the rest of the books that he's written.
If I reread these now,
and the
yeah, exactly. You get shivers, just get out there while you can.
There's also those amazing moments too, where the whole gang, I believe they're reunited with Logan in these moments too, and it's like, oh, it's Rattleneck's son. It's like, isn't he dead? It's like, no, the other one. It's like, but he's a kid. It's like, no, Count the Winters. It's like, oh, They have that conversation like 5 times with everybody as they like keep introducing Shivers, including Logan, who's been separated with them like this whole time. He comes back and they fall into that same rhythm. It's so great. One character we need to bring up, by the way, that I'm kicking myself when you asked me, Will, is Grimm, Harding Grimm. This guy's incredible. He's like, and the second time listening through, I did the audiobooks, which are absolutely incredible. Some of the best audiobooks I've ever heard. Stephen Pacey, like Grimm is famous for not saying anything, but he just goes like,
unbelievable.
And it's like so beautiful. And then you have this, it all comes to a head kind of at the end when he gives Three Trees eulogy. It's like beautiful.
So good. So good.
That did make me tear up, that scene, and it was very emotional. I mean, the way that Three Trees is really the hero of their group. You know, he's always the head, and he's always thinking for everyone else and taking responsibility when really they all need Logan's to be taking charge. And they're left kind of to their own devices. But yeah, that scene when he's killed by Fenris the Feared, that's a mean guy right there.
And they describe like he just gets pounded into the dirt, right? It's like absolutely eviscerated. It's so fascinating to see. It's like, you know, this is a world where magic is leaving the world and heroes are dying, and just the loss of Three Trees, you feel that like that was a big loss for this world and for the North. And the fact that it was this epic battle against the Feared and Harding Grimm gave the eulogy, it's like a really beautiful moment in this book.
Yeah, I think it really shows how much heart there is, doesn't it? That they would all die to save Three Trees. That's Duru, Blackdow, even Shivers, who he admires Three Trees so much, they all run over to try and protect him. Yeah. And then Harding Grimm, I think he really shines them before they're hanged. Two moments I remember specifically is the eulogy, which made me really emotional. And also when they find out he can speak fluent Union. He basically has a go at Laddersley, and he's like, you have no power here. We are doing as Three Trees is saying, and he gives this speech, and no one, not even Blackdow, says and Dogman's is like, that's more words than I've ever heard him say, and he just said it in Union. And it's that balance of humor, but also the serious tone of these books as well. It's just that's just one moment where Joe Abercrombie just nailed it again. And before we move on to the pinnacle, in my opinion, the last argument in Kings, let's talk about how Joe Abercrombie really subverts those tropes. He has the Fellowship, they reach their goal, and they are crushed.
It's such a fantastic reveal. Again, like there's obvious parallels to be made with the Fellowship of the Ring, right? And that whole journey. We were commenting about like how we had read Lord of the Rings, as you had mentioned, and they're like, let Bill go, Bill the pony. And it's like, and then he went off to Tom Bombadil's land and they lived these happy lives and everyone was so great. And then in this one, Giselle's like, well, I guess we let the horses go. And as he's saying that, you know, oh God, what's her name? Pharaoh, thank you, slits the horse's throat, and they're like, well, we're gonna eat it, obviously.
It's and like getting blood horrified. On him.
Yeah, and then that all comes to a head where they get the seed, and it's nothing, and it's just a rock, and they're like, this was nothing. What was this? Nothing happened, and seeing the characters have to process that, and it's so beautiful.
I think that was I've seen some reviews of people that actually knocks down their enjoyment before they're hanged, but I think you get the epic factor. We're all up in the North, and also the ending in Dagoska, don't you? So I think that it was just perfect, and it just really suited subverting those tropes.
I think the time it came out, that, you know, the fantasy back then was, apart from Game of Thrones, was really, you know, very Lord of the Rings-esque, very Tolkien inspired, and then that's what the reader's expecting. You know, I think I'm lucky that I was able to binge all three of them, because leaving that on that kind of cliffhanger, that, you know, what's going to happen next, they failed, would have been hard for a whole year to wait. So definitely.
And it's a fair criticism. I mean, you're reading this giant series and you want to feel like there's some sort of like the plot's going somewhere, and then to have all the air drop out of it right at the end, you're like, what's going on in this book? It seems like nothing's happening this entire book. And it just, like, one of the things I admire most about Abercrombie as an author is his commitment to just holding back on having to explain everything. And he's like, yeah, I'm gonna make this like a failed mission, and then like not deliver in terms of satisfaction plot wise from that. It's like, you can tell to someone that has a plan, as we've talked about, that goes across all these three books, and he's willing to like maybe upset a few readers just to commit to that idea. And the way he takes all these characters that we love and like shine a light on them so truly and completely towards the end, it's like the commitment to that and the bravery you have to have as an author to do that is absolutely incredible. So just to end this with nothing and to drop that on you, it is is pretty incredible. And I can see where some criticism would be like, well, I'm not reading this whole book where nothing happens, but it's like, that's the beauty of it. There's stuff is happening and there's great character work along the whole way. Do we really need to get a seed at the end of this to validate what's going on? And that's like a really interesting thing to think about when you finish this book.
Yeah. And I think it's okay, like you're saying, Charles, it's okay to not like the almost anticlimax that is them not getting the seed after all of this and going through all of this for, you could say, nothing. And it's just Abercrombie's voice and his shtick. And it just, to me, I don't know. I think if you are invested in that kind of almost like nihilistic view that Abercrombie takes into, especially this original trilogy, then it's likely that you'll kind of get the cruel, twisted joke of it. And sometimes it takes all the way through Last Argument of Kings and getting to the end of that, or even rereads. I know Charles felt like a reread actually substantially improved his impression of the First Law trilogy. So all that being said, I don't think it means like it's not for you if you don't like the end of this book, but I think it's about, can you shift your perspective toward this? What kind of story does Abercrombie like to tell? And we'll definitely be able to get into that a lot more when we get into Last Argument of Kings.
Yeah, I think you talked about it being nihilistic, and Charles, you said about Joe Abercrombie having a plan. So I think that's a perfect segue into Last Argument of Kings, the final of this trilogy.
Beautiful.
Man,
I feel left.
I have a copy like that too, Ed, actually. In the other room, I have my original copies. I have these.
We are matching.
Yeah, we've got matching ones, Ed. Yeah,
that's awesome.
Didn't you pillage that from Papa Gwynne as well?
Yeah, well, yeah, this is Dad's.
He just doesn't know it.
Actually, I remember specifically stealing Dad's copies of the First Law, and then when we met Joe Abercrombie, he actually signed them to Edward. So technically they're mine. They actually have my name in it. So
wow.
That's awesome.
Yeah, living the dream over there. I aspire to one day meet Joe Abercrombie.
He's a great
guy.
remember
just being really scared. I think I hadn't read any of his works when I met him. How old was I? 13, 14? Looking at it, I was like, oh my word. And then
I'd read the Blade itself, and I was like, I remember a couple of years ago, and I said, Joe, come on, when are you going to read Dad's books? Come on, you got to advertise it. And he goes, who even reads nowadays?
Oh my god,
very Joe Abercrombie in response.
Yeah,
it's so funny. Carry on, Dylan.
No, I was just make a stupid joke. I was gonna be like, scared is a reasonable reaction to the guy who wrote the Bloody Nine, but all I was gonna do is interrupt the flow of the episode.
Well, you did say that a part of him is in all his characters. So, well, that's a bit scary.
I've heard that.
It's a bit scary.
Yeah, so he's like, people ask him who are these people based on or anything like that, and he'll just be like, all of them are me in one way or another. And then you start looking at some of these characters, you're like, uh-oh. But no, I hear amazing things in every interview I see. Yeah. No, he seems really nice and all this stuff. He's just a guy with a lot of characters to talk about. Yeah.
But saying that he's very nice, there's a few things that I just cannot forgive in the Last Argument of Kings. We're going to talk about the characters and their endings. But just to kick it off, Colin West, there wasn't much left, and I actually just stopped. I was just like, "What? You cannot do that."
Yeah,
you skip straight to the end, Will. And
I had to. It's just I was feeling.
Will you skip to the end?
No, as in not in the actual book.
Oh, you're saying, in the episode. I was like, oh, wow, he just went there.
Yes. If you skip 2 pages, then we would be in a circle right now.
Yeah. Well, we do feel like, we wanted to give Wes his time to shine. We do all these character studies for each character in the First Law trilogy. And it took us a while to get around to Wes, but it was this idea of like his arc is really about, when you think of it, like the price of loyalty and how loyal he was to a governing body that like psychologically he just never really gelled with. And it caused him to have this distance with his family and suppress his like inner self, which then manifested as rage all the time. And then now in these final moments, he was, he got everything. He pulled himself up from a commoner to the highest position you can get in the military and charged bravely into his own hometown under siege and just, died of a sickness in the background because of Baez's, callous decision to unleash the seed on the city. And it's just the reality. This is like the price of loyalty. Sometimes like not every hero dies in a blaze of glory. Sometimes they get sick and fade off and whimper out of the story. And that in itself is a tragedy. But I think Abercrombie, again, the bravery he has with playing some of these pieces, it's like he could have so easily made West die in like this charge of bravery right after like being forgiven by his sister and all that. But what we do is we see him suffering, like fading away on his deathbed, being sick from this wasting disease. And it's so well played and like such a brilliant move. It's risky to kind of have some of your characters fade out that you've worked so hard with and that have fans and all of that, but it makes the story that much more real. It makes the stakes that much more interesting. It gives context to Baez's state of mind, which we never really fully understood until these last handful of pages, and it's all brilliant.
It's so tragic, but as you said, it makes it seem so real. And I skipped straight to the end there, just throwing it all off, but let's go back a bit. I think the last segment of Kings is a great book for side characters, isn't it? I mean, Paulder and Croy, for me, their relationship before they're hanged, you just want to give them a shake. And then when how their relationship grows, I love the scene when West gets to the top of the hierarchy. He gets what he deserves for a little while, and then he has that conversation with them, and he's like, Croy, he's my best mate now, and I'm going to listen to him, and you're going to have to just do everything I say, or I can send this letter off. And then he gets Paulder in, and he says, Croy's my best mate, and I'm going to do everything he says, and you're going to have to do everything I say now. And I love that scene, how they're both like, oh, we underestimated this man, and we now we need to listen. And then we'll talk a bit about in the Siege of Adua how that relationship culminates. But let's go
back to the Fellowship. The Fellowship has crumbled now. They've reached Adua, and no one's on good terms, really. And I quite like how the band just disintegrates, really, and they all then spread into their directions. Logan has the whole journey has just made Logan realize that he needs to go back to the beginning, which is actually the title of the last chapter. I believe. So,
it is,
very fitting. And then Jezzel is deciding to, like Logan has passed the torch. Jezzel's trying to be a better person. He wants to go home and just see Ardi and marry her and live a simple life. And Baez really has different ideas.
So even Jezal has different ideas. This scene is so fascinating because this whole time Logan's like, leave the fighting for stupider people and like take my advice, find a nice woman and settle down. And then here he is with someone who's willing to like be in a relationship with him if they just talked in these moments. And he's like, well, I guess so. She's like, what are you going to do? He's like, I guess I'm going to go to the north and settle some scores. And you're like, what? This is the guy who this whole time was saying to settle down and avoid fighting. And he's going to like, there's no scores to settle, Logan. You're making these things up in your head. And it's these moments that like, there's so many reasons that we love Logan, and there's so much unsaid about his character in this trilogy about Logan of like what he's saying versus what he does, and just how he continues to pursue violence against his own advice, which is super fascinating.
I mean, I think a lot that I loved about him is he's very understated, isn't he? That obviously not so much when he's the bloody nine, but in those moments where you see he just needs to take his advice, and there won't be a happy ending. There will never be a happy ending, but a less tragic one.
I was hoping though throughout the whole book, I was thinking that there must be something happy. Oh, surely he won't die.
Or maybe there'll be onwards. That we'll get to that last scene. One of my favorite scenes of the last argument of Kings is during the vote for the next king, and he's sitting there just happy, not really paying attention. He's just thinking about Ardi. He's like, oh, I'm going to see Ardi again soon. And Pharaoh's there, and she's all bored. And Baez nominates.
I love it.
He nominates Jezzel, and it goes straight to Pharaoh's perspective.
Yes.
And she looks at Jezzel. She sees how confused he is, and it says she made this really weird sound, and she realized she was laughing, and she said, "That is funny."
Yeah.
Only time to laugh.
It's so good. Yeah, because Pharaoh's in the Union now and she's looking around and she's like, what is wrong with this place? It is so stuffy. And she just doesn't understand all the just silly things about society. And she sees right through them. And she's like, of course, the person that they would want to be the king and lead them is Jezal, the most spoiled brat I have ever met. So it's so funny because you know Pharaoh's perspective so much, and she's, Jezal's gone through a lot of growth and all of that, but she's still kind of right when it comes to
but I mean, Jezal did go through growth, but what I love, again, in these early books, like you can tell like just where fantasy, like modern fantasy was at the time. I think Abercrombie was leaning more on subversion in these books than in his later books.
Yeah.
And he was very committed on this idea of like characters like kind of unlearning their lessons, which is not something you always get in a classic fantasy story. It's like usually like right at the end, they learn their lesson and they beat the bad guy and get the girl at the end. But it's like Jezal like gets the girl, like gets all this advice from some of the most powerful sage people in this whole world, Baez, Logan, Pharaoh. He's like learned from all of them. And then I remember the scene literally like he's in front of the door and Artie's literally in the bedroom right behind the door, and the army's like, we want to promote you, and he's like, me be promoted? And then he's like, that makes total sense. It's about time I got my due and was promoted, and I can lead the charge and I'll get glory. Literally after he just convinced himself he was going to settle down and like be with Artie forever, he's making all of these decisions and accepting all these things that are so obviously traps, but he's so self-involved that he thinks he's earned them somehow. And he just slowly unlearns these lessons and gets back into this place. And it's his tragedy, right? He's like, I was never more free than when I was a captain. And now that I'm the king, it's like the exact opposite. And it's that kind of unlearned lessons thing that got him to where he is in the end, which is one of the most tragic endings for a character besides maybe Wes.
I think talking about that, it is on the edge of losing all his redeemable qualities throughout. That adds attention, doesn't it? I mean, there's a scene just as he becomes king, he throws, I think, a goblet or something at one of the closed council members, and then at first he feels a little bit guilty, and then he's like, I'm the king. I'm doing what I want. And I remember there's a very ominous moment where he gets annoyed and shouts at Baez, and Baez says very quietly, he says, you can treat them how you want, but you do not talk to me like that. And I was like, Jezal, just be careful here. Be careful. And Jezal filmed that as well. And he's like, sorry. But his arc, I love how he teaches, because in life, people don't just make decisions just like, I can see through everything. I know what I need to do. And he's like, be king, Artie, these lessons. What do I do? And he's still got those ingrained lessons that the family's been raised with, have his noble family have like put into him. That idea of, okay, win glory. It matters more what other people think of you rather than what you actually are. And that ending with Jezal as well, just as I was so happy, like I actually felt like a sense of joy that his ending, what he was about to do, and then Baez just ripped it away.
Yeah, with Jezal, this going back to who he was before, I think I said on our episode way back, I was like, you can take the kid out of the Agrion, but you can't take the Agrion out of the kid. And it's all about what are the incentives telling Jezal to do, and he slowly but surely comes around to them. So when he's in this situation of like the sticks and carrots are telling him to become a more grounded, better person who understands his privilege like they were before they're hanged, he's starting to do it. And then when the sticks and carrots start pulling him in the direction of, oh no, you're great, you're the king, you're amazing, he really, really starts to believe it. And then Baez gives him that one final incentive to stay in his place. And it's that moment where he just wrenches Jezal's guts. And it's interesting because Jezal's not really capable, I think, of understanding the true machinations behind what Baez is up to, the way that Glokta is capable of doing it. But Jezal can understand the visceral pain that, that Baez is capable of inflicting on him. And that really puts him in his place. And it's
that
sad.
Scene really does
recontextualize
the whole trilogy.
Yeah. It really does. And talking about Glokta as well, how he ends up at the end of this, his whole arc, and the irony that Jezal in the Blade itself hates him, and he's like, I'm going to get as far away from him as possible, and it ends up that Glox is going to be close to him.
You can't get away.
Long time. And there's one of their interactions, and you can kind of see Jezal realizing, I'm going to be seeing him every day, and Glocta reveling in that as well. He's like, you're not so smug now, are you? And that moment, I think it really does contextualize the series, doesn't it? And you see, this is where Baez has been aiming the whole time. You've just not seen it.
You've seen that, you can see those seeds have been planted since book 1, like when Jezal at the competition meets the king, doesn't he? And the king says, "Oh, my son." And
his dad is actually terrified when he sees Baez.
Yeah, exactly. So you've seen that stuff seeded throughout, and it shows that, like you said earlier, Will, Joe Abercrombie did have a plan.
And then he subverts that even by having the big reveal that Jezal was just a bastard. And that's the amazing thing about Abercrombie, I think, as we talked about, is this, Charles calls it bravery or commitment. I totally agree. It's like he set all of that groundwork where he could have had that big moment if he was the king's kid all along and we would have bought it, that it was foreshadowed. And then he just turns it on its head and goes one step further to drive home his voice and his tone and his point about things. So good.
Yeah.
You can just picture a young Joe Abercrombie reading Lord of the Rings and being like, if there was really a character as powerful as Gandalf, there's no way he'd be like a well-adjusted human being. You would think people are ants. And like so many other things about this story. And it's so brilliant to see that all come to a head in those last few scenes of this. It redefines the whole trilogy in such a brilliant way.
Yeah, the character's just so well realized, aren't they? And you can see that Joe Abercrombie, he's had this in mind. And talking about subversion, one of my favorite sections is where they go back into the house of the Maker and you meet Ptolemy and you realize that's the moment you realize, okay, Baez is very bad news. And I think throughout the whole trilogy, basically the only character who he seems the nicest out of the lot is Yolwe. And he's like, he asks him again, he says, brother, did you kill Juvens? And I thought I saw Canedius fall first. And Baez is like, no, you're wrong. He's like, memory just over time forget things. And then when Ptolemy and Yolwe says, I'll buy you some time, and Baez just shuts the door and turns.
That was so good because he knows that Yolwe kind of knows the truth. So he's like, there was nothing we could do. He was such a brave man, my closest friend. And meanwhile, it's like, you obviously locked him in to die on purpose to keep your secret alive. It's so obvious. And then it brings you back to when he's like sitting at the fire with everyone before they're hanged, and he's sharing that story about how much he was in love with Ptolemy and how tragic it was that she died and how he never loved again. It's like all baloney. It was like many time. He's a sociopath.
Yeah, and again, that subversion in most other series, I think Ptolemy would have been the big bad. Would have got out being the big bag. Oh, I can't get my words right. Big bad. But in this, okay, she's locked up. Now I'm going to Baez is like, now I'm the big bad. And he wins ultimately, doesn't he?
Mm-hmm. He gets his goal, and he's bad Gandalf. He's really, really mean. Let's go on over to Who the Moon Loves, Logan Ninefingers, and Crummocky Vale, one of my favorites. But I love how Logan back into just assumes his position in the crew, doesn't he? And then he meets Shivers, like you mentioned earlier, Charles, and that meeting is excellent. I love how both of those come together. And then Logan goes against Bethod. And the Battle of the High Places was one of my favorite kind of action set pieces.
Yeah.
First Law. And the Bloody Nine goes real Bloody Nine.
That moment with Tolduru, it says that, and then he smiled. And it's that moment I was like, no, Tolduru, run. And what that scene, because you've seen what the Bloody Nine can do, but you've not seen him hurt his friends with it yet. And that scene, just heart-wrenching. And then the funeral afterwards and his self-loathing. You can just feel it in every single word, like you were saying earlier, with like scathing the own characters, like with Dimly, you said, Dylan. With Jezal, you feel that with every word of Logan, don't you? Just this self-loathing, but he's driven by, okay, I'm going to get this done, but I hate myself. But I'm going to do it to try and help other people, and maybe it can help me a bit.
Yeah, it's so well said. It's truly, and I love that moment where like he's actually embraced the Bloody Nine when he's fighting the Feared, and then he's going to face Bethod, and it's all these ominous things of like, I'm telling you over and over, it's like, you caused all of this is your fault, and Logan's just like, I don't care, and kills him. It's like so poignant, and it just kind of makes you recontextualize the whole series and everything that you just read. And I also think it's why I personally vastly enjoyed the reread, because it's like, wow, you see exactly what was going on with these characters and what was happening in this world. And Logan's arc is ultra fascinating because it's so understated, and he's so loved by fans, and us including. It's like, he's the hero, he's funny, he's wise, he's this like philosopher barbarian that we all love. And then it's like, well, there's also this addiction to violence about him that we're not quite sure. I was wondering, what do you guys have Bloody Nine theories? Is this like an actual possession thing, or is Logan just a bad guy?
So that's a hard. I feel like he does have this love for violence. I think that's why it's what he's good at. He says something. I think in Red Country that you return to what you're good at, or something like that.
You can't escape your nature.
You can't, exactly. Yeah. And I think he does love. He loves being it. He feels that this is something I can actually do. But then balanced by, he does want to be a better person. There's actually one of my favorite little scenes in this. I've said that a lot, but another one of my favorite scenes is where he sees Jezzel in Adua, and he says, am I a bad man? And he's all this self-loathing, and Jezzel looks at him and like just so confused, and he's like, you're the best man I know. And that hits hard.
That's a great scene.
And it's just Logan's reaction as well.
It's so simple, isn't it? But that really hit me hard. And it was where, you realize, and Logan, that he felt that emotion, didn't he?
Yeah.
And that he does hate himself, the poor man. But then you don't think he's a poor man when you see he's killed his friend Tulduru. And then when I think
and Cromacif
son. And when I read this short story in Sharpens, that made me again rethink the way I see Logan.
Sharpens is some great world building stuff going on in that.
100%. And that whole short story section, you haven't read that yet, Will, have you?
No,
made me see Logan for who he was when he was younger. Has he really changed that much? Looking at his actions, we might not have seen him, laughing gleefully, and although we do when he's the Bloody Nine, when he's committing all sorts of atrocities.
Yeah, right. And
Logan, isn't it?
And talking about his arc also, and we talked about Black Dow as well, and how perceptive he is. Black Dow like nails it on the head at the end of this book, right? Where it's like he just eviscerates Logan, and he's the only one in this whole trilogy amongst all the fandom who's like, you're a horrible person, you're worse than me. It's like, you are the worst guy. You think you're a hero, and then you do all these horrible things. It's like, of course you're a bad person, and I don't like you. And to hear that, you're like, whoa. And from Black Dow, no less, who is the personification of the like violent tendencies of the North. He's been described as embracing all these violent things, to be like, you're evil, not me. It's like,
I think that's one of those scenes where you see that in any other series you would hate Black Dow, but in this you understand that from his perspective, he's seen everything that Logan has done. And if the story was told from Black Dow's perspective, everyone would think he's in the right. He is in the right. It's only because you've seen it side to Logan, but you can't blame Black Dow for that, can you?
No.
That's one of my favorite quotes. I gotta hear. It's Black Dow telling him right before they go after trying to kill him is, but you love to play the good man, don't you? Do you know what's worse than a villain? A villain who thinks he's a hero. A man like that, there's nothing he won't do, and he'll always find himself an excuse. We've had one ruthless bastard make himself king of the North, and I'll be damned before I see a worse. So that's Black Dow's perspective. It's like, hey, I might be a bad dude, but you're worse because you tell yourself a story about how you're being a hero when you're doing absolutely terrible things.
And he knows he's not a hero.
Yes, at least Black Dow has a level of acceptance. And it's just the beauty of how Abercrombie uses point of view, where like you said, if Black Dow was the point of view character, Logan would be the villain, and Dow would be the person we were rallying behind to get him out of there.
100%. Again, that point, that whole section in the circle when Logan's fighting Fenris the Feared, and you're so behind Logan, you're so worried that he's going to die, and then the way that his whole arc just wraps up with he does defeat the bad guy, doesn't he? He saves the North. He does everything that in a classic fantasy the hero would have done, and then the way he gets his comeuppance, as it were, and the symmetry between how he starts in the blade itself and how he finishes exactly the same, falling. It's genius. That's what I think it is. Joe Abercrombie's writing is just amazing.
Yeah, it is absolutely genius because he does subvert everything you're expecting, but he does it in a way that it's satisfying in its own way and it's nihilistic. And I think Papa Gwynne himself, he said when he finished Last Argument of Kings, he said, if I wanted something that real, I could turn on the news.
Wow. That's quite a line.
But you love it anyway. And I think we could talk about this for hours and hours, and we've got through quite a lot, and I've really loved talking about some of our favorite moments and favorite parts of this trilogy. But I think, have we covered?
Well, is there anything else that you guys feel like you need to mention with the Last Argument of Kings, or to, just to talk about one final thing?
Yeah, I would say, like I made my father read it as well, and he was like, "Oh, it was over the river, through the woods, but there was no grandma's house at the end." And like, that's a fair criticism. I get that. This book was very purposely being very subversive, but I mean, for me, I kind of thought that way the first time too. I was like, Baez was revealing his true nature, and I'm like, I'm 99% through this book. Like, how could there be only a few pages left? Shouldn't there be so much more? Like, I feel like we just got started, but on the reread, you're like, oh, this is everything. And it's just how he used point of view, how he used character work, how he used like subversion. It's just like absolutely like one of the only, it's so unique to Abercrombie's voice. And it's such a unique reading experience that I've just truly appreciated and couldn't recommend enough. And like what he does as he goes forwards, as he kind of distances himself from subversion and from grimdark, like he still is very much all of those things, but you can tell he's developing his themes more and honing his craft more, and he has more to say in these later works. That it's so, and that the way he is fearlessly evolving his world as well as First Law universe, it's truly incredible. So if you've only read to here, keep reading, guys. There's so much more.
So much more as well.
I agree. What about you, Dylan?
Yeah, I just doubled down on what Charles was just saying about, in my opinion, Joe Abercrombie just keeps getting better and better as he keeps going through the standalones, and then the Age of Madness, I think, is his best work yet. So like Charles was saying, if you were a fan of the First Law trilogy, and you're like, oh, well, I'll check out what some other people have to offer, I kind of get what Joe Abercrombie's doing. It's like, no, he is evolving and continuing to build on what he's done before. So I recommend picking up Best Served Cold would be the next one in publication order if you haven't had the chance to read that one yet. It is so good. It's like a thriller and all this stuff. This is good. I have the they made a graphic novel thing just very briefly. Yeah, but this is Best Served Cold. So yeah, if so good, and a standalone story that just will blow you away. So keep going if you haven't with this series. So good.
And we are looking forward to talking about the standalones in another chat like this, hopefully pretty soon. But for now, I've loved talking about this trilogy. It has gone up amongst my favorite trilogies of all time. And it's partly due to you two that I jumped on it so quickly. So I've loved talking about this. And hopefully people who are still with us, who have been watching, have enjoyed talking about this as well. Some nostalgia, talking about favorite moments. And maybe got a few insights that you hadn't thought of before. It's made me think of a lot more things talking to you two that I didn't really notice 100%, but now I do, and it's really going to heighten the experience when I reread this.
Yeah, so, and Dylan and Charles are obviously experts in the world of the First Law. Just listening to their podcast, they may laugh, but I think it's so much fun to chat with both of you about all things fantasy, and especially the First Law. You guys know the world inside out, and I think one day when you meet Joe Abercrombie, he will be very pleased to meet you.
Oh my gosh, one day. Yeah, we'll get there.
Guys,
don't dress up as Joffrey.
I think, I think he'd appreciate it. I know he's a big Game of Thrones fan, so he'd probably think I was a big weirdo if I showed up dressed as Joffrey, but he'd find that out eventually if he talked to me. So it's like, anyway, guys, this has been such a pleasure. It's so much fun chatting with you guys. Thank you so much. And I feel the same way, learning new things, hearing your perspectives on First Law, and it's just brilliant, as you folks across the pond like to say, to get the chance to chat with you about this. Cracking. That's
blooming brilliant.
Brilliant. Yeah, guys, thank you so much for having us on. It's like we can talk about First Law all day. And I gotta be honest with you, I had no idea how we were going to talk about all 3 books in one go, but you guys are brilliant leaders. You kept us in check, and that deserves all guys. If they can keep us talking about 3 Abercrombie books in one episode and keep it tight and contained, these guys are pros. So thank you for having us and for keeping us on track, because we love to derail when it comes to Abercrombie.
We did talk about tennis within the opening.
I know it was a little dicey at the start. 20 minutes in, we're talking about tennis, but somehow we brought it back. You guys are real pros.
Yes,
from match point, we got it back.
There we go.
Well, guys, friends talking fantasy, thank you. Go check out their podcast and go follow them on Twitter as well at is it the FTF?
The
podcast
one on
That's
Twitter.
One. Yeah, it has one at the end.
Yeah.
We'll pop it up on screen. But thank you so much, guys. And in the meantime, stay safe. We'll see you next time. Truth and courage.
Truth and courage. Like and subscribe.
Truth and courage. The Brothers Gwynne.
Brothers Gwynne.